Towards the end of World War II, the Allies tried to enter southern Italy after the invasion of Sicily. The Wehrmacht decided it had to stop them by any means necessary. The Germans also felt betrayed by their Italian allies, who had turned against them. In this context, the Germans had a deadly ally, very difficult to combat, which did its job so effectively that the consequences lasted for decades. This was the Nazis' secret biological weapon. It was used in an attempt to slow down the Allied forces and also to punish the Italians with a plague that had long wreaked havoc in the past. On the 3rd of September 1943, the Allies invaded Italy's west coast at Salerno. Italy was seen as a weak point in the well-defended Third Reich, Winston Churchill calling it, quote, the soft underbelly of the Axis. The invasion aimed to remove Italy from the alliance and weaken the German influence in the Mediterranean Sea. On the 13th of October 1943, the Allies recognized Italy as a co-belligerent in the war against Germany. Because of the successful Allied operations, the German armies had to fall back. As the German armies retreated through the rugged Italian countryside, they knew their situation was becoming increasingly desperate. The Allies, with their superior numbers and resources, were pressing northward with relentless determination. The Germans, outnumbered and outgunned, had to find a way to slow down the Allied advance. Traditional military tactics were no longer enough. They needed something more insidious, something that could cripple the enemy from within. The Wehrmacht, under orders from high command, turned to a secret weapon that had been quietly discussed among certain circles within the Nazi hierarchy, a biological weapon that was as old as the land itself: malaria. The disease had long been a scourge in Italy, particularly in the swampy lowlands and coastal regions. Now, the Germans planned to use it as a tool of war. How did they manage to spread it? The answer is simple. The swamps in Italy, particularly those along the coastal areas and in the Pontine marshes, were infamous breeding grounds for malaria-carrying mosquitoes. These wetlands, characterized by stagnant water and dense vegetation, had long been associated with high rates of malaria, making them a significant public health challenge. The drainage of these swamps using various methods was a key component of Italy's efforts to combat malaria. But this created an opportunity for the Wehrmacht. Upon retreating from the region, German troops intentionally flooded large tracts of land by reversing drainage pumps and breaching levees. These actions were not merely about creating physical obstacles for the advancing Allied troops, but were also aimed at creating mosquito breeding grounds. By flooding the delta, the Germans effectively turned the landscape into a massive incubator for malaria, hoping that the ensuing epidemic would weaken the Allied forces and stall their advance. This biological warfare strategy was not conceived in isolation. It was informed by the expertise of German and Italian malariologists, who understood the disease's impact on both military and civilian populations. Among them was Alberto Misiroli, a prominent Italian scientist with a long history of studying malaria. Misiroli, who had worked closely with German malariologist Erich Martini, saw the flooding as more than just a military tactic. He viewed it as an unprecedented opportunity to study the spread and control of malaria on a large scale. We will speak about this later in the video. As the floodwaters spread and the mosquito population exploded, the effects were immediate and devastating. By the summer of 1944, the Tiber Delta and the surrounding areas were in the grip of a severe malaria epidemic. The disease ravaged both the local population and the Allied soldiers who were stationed in or passing through the area. The Allies, who had advanced through Sicily and now southern Italy with relative ease, suddenly found themselves facing an invisible enemy. Thousands of soldiers fell ill, their strength sapped by the debilitating fevers and chills of malaria. The military hospitals were soon overwhelmed, with more men being incapacitated by disease than by combat. The Allies were forced to slow their advance as they struggled to deal with this new, unforeseen threat. The effects of the German strategy were felt for years, even after the war had ended. Malaria, which had been nearly eradicated in Italy, remained a persistent problem in the affected regions for decades. The land, damaged by the flooding and the subsequent loss of agricultural productivity, took years to recover, and the people, who had borne the brunt of the disease, carried the scars of this invisible war long after the guns had fallen silent. The introduction of DDT and other measures eventually led to a dramatic reduction in malaria cases, and by the 1950s, the disease was largely eradicated from the peninsula. DDT is a synthetic chemical compound that was widely used as an insecticide, particularly during and after World War II. It is best known for its effectiveness in killing mosquitoes that spread malaria, as well as other insects that carried dangerous diseases. In response to the outbreak, Misiroli and his team began testing DDT in the hopes of controlling the mosquito population and, by extension, the spread of malaria. However, Misiroli's approach was controversial and raised serious ethical questions. He decided to suspend the distribution of anti-malarial drugs like quinine and atabrine in certain areas, choosing instead to use these communities as control groups for his experiments with DDT. Misiroli rationalized this decision by arguing that the results of the DDT trials would provide valuable data for future malaria control efforts, but the immediate consequence was that many people were left without treatment in the midst of a deadly epidemic. This is an even darker side of this event, as Italian scientists used their own compatriots to test the effectiveness of chemicals and different so-called solutions. We hope you enjoyed this documentary. See you next time at Study of War. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support us in creating valuable content like this.